The HOA board laughed at my flood wall. And less than 10 minutes later, water was rushing through their front doors. The HOA board didn't just dislike my flood wall. They openly mocked it. From the very first day construction started, they treated it like some kind of personal insult. Emails began flooding my inbox faster than rainwater ever could. They said the wall ruined community aesthetics. That's it. Wasn't approved. And that it made the neighborhood look industrial. One board member even laughed during a meeting and said, "Do you really think a little concrete is going to stop a real flood?" That comment stuck with me. I had done everything by the book. Permits approved. Engineers hired. Inspections passed. But logic didn't matter to them. What mattered was control. The wall represented something they hated. A homeowner making a decision without asking for permission first. They sent violation notices, threatened daily fines, and warned me that legal action was on the table if I didn't remove it immediately. One email literally called the wall a joke and claimed it would redirect water and cause problems for everyone else. I responded calmly, explaining the design, showing reports, and even offering to share the engineering plans with the board. They didn't want facts. They wanted compliance. At the next HOA meeting, things got worse. Several board members rolled their eyes while I spoke. One interrupted me mid-sentence and said, "You're overreacting. This neighborhood has never flooded like that." Another accused me of I didn't just warn the HOA board once. I warned them over and over again. Every time the weather forecast showed heavy rain, I forwarded the reports. When the city issued a flood advisory, I emailed screenshots. When the drainage map showed our block sitting lower than the surrounding area, I printed it out and brought it to the meeting. Each time, I was met with the same reaction: smirks, jokes, and dismissive comments that made it clear they had already decided I was the problem. One board member literally laughed and said, "You watch too much disaster news." Another waved their hand and told me, "This isn't a flood zone. Stop being dramatic." They kept repeating that line, like saying it enough times would make it true. I tried to stay calm, even when it was obvious they weren't listening. I explained that flood patterns had changed, that the last few storms were worse than anything recorded before, and that water doesn't care about HOA opinions. None of it mattered. What really frustrated me was that they refused to take even the smallest preventative step. I suggested clearing the storm drains. Denied. I asked about emergency sandbags. Unnecessary. I proposed a temporary barrier for the HOA office itself. They actually laughed at that one and said, "If your wall works so well, maybe we hide behind it." The room erupted in chuckles, and I realized in that moment they were more concerned with saving face than protecting homes. They accused me of fear-mongering. They said I was trying to scare neighbors to justify my wall. One email claimed I was creating panic over a non-issue. Another warned me that spreading false flood risks could violate community rules. That's when it became clear they weren't just ignoring the warnings. They were actively silencing them. The night before the storm, I sent one last message. Short, polite, direct. I told them the rain totals had increased. The ground was already saturated. An overflow was likely. The response came back in less than 5 minutes. Noted. No action required. That was it. No preparation. No warning to residents. No plan. I read that message, closed my laptop, and went outside to check my wall one last time. I had a feeling, the kind you can shake, that by morning, someone was going to wish they had taken those warnings seriously. The storm didn't arrive slowly. It slammed into the neighborhood like it had something to prove. Rain started falling in thick sheets, pounding the roofs so hard it sounded like gravel being dumped from the sky. Within minutes, the street gutters were overflowing, and the usual drains couldn't keep up. I stood at my window watching the water rise faster than I'd ever seen before, and that uneasy feeling from the night before turned into certainty. Across the street, water crept up driveways, swallowing curbs and turning lawns into shallow ponds. The rain kept coming, heavier and louder, until visibility dropped and the world looked blurred behind the downpour. Then the real moment hit. A loud rush echoed down the block. Not thunder, but moving water. The drainage channel near the HOA managed properties overflowed first, spilling straight into the lowest section of the neighborhood like a broken dam. Within minutes, water surged toward the HOA offices and board members' homes. It pushed through doorways, seeped into garage doors, and rushed across tile floors. I watched as patio furniture floated. Trash bins tipped over, and cars sat half submerged, their hazard lights blinking uselessly through the rain. Neighbors ran outside in panic, shoes soaked, phones in hand, shouting over the noise of the storm. Meanwhile, the water hit my flood wall and stopped. It pooled against the concrete barrier exactly as the engineers predicted, redirecting safely away from my property. My yard stayed dry. My foundation stayed untouched. The difference was impossible to ignore. On one side, chaos. On the other, calm. Emergency sirens cut through the rain as first responders arrived, wading through knee-deep water. I saw police and fire crews trying to block off streets that were already underwater. Someone shouted about shutting off power. Another yelled that the HOA office was flooding fast. The same building where my warnings had been laughed at was now taking on water through every possible opening. Standing there, watching water rush through their doors just minutes after being told there was no risk, felt surreal. I didn't feel joy, just a quiet, heavy realization settling in. Everything I had warned them about was happening in real time. The storm didn't care about votes, meetings, or authority. It followed gravity, and it exposed the truth faster than any argument ever could. Panic spread faster than the water. What had been laughter and dismissal hours earlier turned into shouting, frantic phone calls, and complete confusion. I watched from behind my flood wall as HOA board members splashed through the water they had insisted wasn't a problem. Shoes ruined, clothes soaked, voices raised in disbelief. One of them slipped trying to wade across the flooded parking area and had to be helped back up by a neighbor. The confidence they carried into every meeting was gone. Someone from the board started yelling for maintenance, even though there was no maintenance team on call. Another was on the phone demanding emergency services arrive faster, as if raising their voice could lower the water level. The HOA office doors were forced open, and water rushed inside, spreading across the floor in seconds. Files floated loose, electronics sparked and went dark, and the sound of water slapping against the walls echoed through the building. It was chaos. That's when the calls started coming in. My phone buzzed again and again. Numbers I recognized immediately. Board members, the same people who had threatened fines, mocked my warnings, and called my flood wall a joke were now asking questions they should be asked weeks earlier. One message read, "Do you know how high the water is expected to get?" Another asked if I had extra barriers or sandbags. Someone even suggested that maybe my wall could somehow help protect the office. I stepped outside briefly, staying safely behind the wall, and saw one board member wave at me desperately from across the water. Their voice cracked as they shouted for help, asking what they should do. There was no anger in them anymore, just fear. The authority they once wielded had dissolved the moment reality hit. I didn't gloat. I didn't say, "I told you so." I simply repeated what I'd been saying all along. Move valuables up, cut power if it's safe, and wait for emergency crews. Watching them scramble was uncomfortable, not satisfying, but it was impossible to ignore the reversal. The people who once controlled everything were now completely powerless, standing in rising water, realizing too late that preparation would have changed everything. When the storm finally passed and the water began to drain, the difference between preparation and arrogance was impossible to ignore. My home stood exactly as it had before. Dry floors, intact foundation, no damage beyond a few wet leaves stuck against the flood wall. Across the neighborhood, the HOA managed properties told a very different story. Carpets were ruined, drywall soaked, furniture destroyed, and the HOA office looked like it had been abandoned in a hurry. The wall they had mocked had done exactly what it was designed to do. The silence from the HOA board was louder than any apology. No more emails, no violation notices, no threats of fines. For days, there was nothing. Then a notice finally went out to the community acknowledging unexpected flooding. and promising a review of drainage policies. Not a single mention of the warnings they ignored or the resident they ridiculed. But everyone knew. Neighbors talked. Photos circulated. The truth didn't need an official statement. A week later, the board requested a meeting. This time, the tone was different. No interruptions. No eye rolls. Just uncomfortable pauses and carefully chosen words. They asked about the flood wall. How it worked. Who designed it. Whether similar protections could be installed elsewhere. The same structure once labeled a joke was now being treated like a solution. I shared the information without hesitation. Because protecting the community was always the goal. Even when the board made it personal. What changed wasn't just their attitude toward flood protection. It was their authority. People started questioning decisions, asking for transparency, and demanding preparedness instead of excuses. The storm exposed more than weak drainage. It exposed a leadership that valued control over safety. I still see the flood wall every day. It is quiet, unremarkable, and solid, just doing its job. And every time it rains now, I remember how quickly laughter turned into panic, and how reality doesn't need permission to prove a point. Preparation isn't paranoia. Sometimes, it's the only thing standing between you and disaster. If you enjoy real HOA stories where karma hits fast, hit subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens next.